When I think about any kind of human behavior, my first question is, why? Why do people do the things they do? Why do some people decide to commit genocide? Or why do some people decide not to subscribe to my channel? Recently, I've been wondering about gender identity and what it actually means to have a different gender than your biological sex. Traditionally, the definitions of man and woman are tied to biology, yet a new ideology has emerged that wants to change those definitions. This ideology holds the concept of gender as being separate from biological sex. I'm calling it the new ideology because I don't really know what else to call it. Some people call it social justice. If you're more educated, you might call it third wave feminist theory. And if you have a 9,000 IQ Jordan Peterson brain, you probably call it
radical postmodern neo-Marxist.
I can't really say for sure if it's any of these things specifically, or if it's an amalgamation of all of them, but it wasn't how people talked about gender when I was growing up, so to me, it's just the new ideology. So, how would we traditionally define a woman? Well, there are two possible ways I can think of. One is based on genetics and physical characteristics. Basically, does it have a vagina? And the other is based on psychological characteristics. Does it act the way that women act? But these days, saying that you need to have a vagina to be classified as a woman is seen as transphobic. Saying that women act a certain way is seen as sexist. Furthermore, the masculine or feminine qualities we ascribe to any hobbies or interests are called social constructs and therefore not an accurate description of something we should call womanly. So my question is, under the new ideology, what is a woman? Because it seems to be completely ambiguous. I understand that new ideologies emerge, and I also understand that language evolves over time. Yet I question the usefulness of this specific change. It doesn't seem very useful to change the definition of woman from an objective concept like have a vagina to a word that doesn't seem to mean much of anything. This is why I really don't understand trans women and the concept of wanting to be a woman. If the word woman has no real definition, then what does it mean to want to be that? And although I know people will screech transphobia in the comments anyway, let me just say that I have nothing against trans people. I really don't care what you want to call yourself or what sex holes you have. I legitimately do not understand what it means to be a woman under this new ideology. Does it mean that you want others to see you as a woman? It's not a challenge to be a woman to people who subscribe to the ideology that the word woman is a completely ambiguous concept. To those people, all you need to do is call yourself a woman, and congratulations, you're a woman. The conflict seems to arise when a trans woman wants someone who does not subscribe to their ideology to see them as a woman. They want to be seen as a woman by people who understand the word woman to mean having a vagina, or even more scientifically, having the genetic makeup of a female. There seem to be two different approaches to solving this problem. The first is to call people transphobic in order to shame them into changing their definition of what woman is. I feel that trying to force someone into changing their ideology to what you think is a superior ideology is authoritarian. I also feel that trying to change the definition of words to account for your personal feelings is egotistical. And I don't really care what ideology you follow. Despite making silly videos about it, I really don't care when gay furries have giant crosses on their persona. What I would be upset by is if a horde of gay Catholic furries tried to publicly shame me or get my social media accounts banned or dox me if I were to point out that being a gay Catholic furry seems a little weird and contradictory. Those gay Catholic furries would be seen as just a tad bit psychotic if they were to try to punish me or shame me into changing my mind. But for some reason, it's fine for trans people to do it to anyone who questions their ideology. The second approach is for trans women to mimic what they perceive women to be. This usually involves gender reassignment surgery, voice training, wearing female clothing, and using feminine mannerisms. If that's how you want to live, once again, fair enough. But you must then admit that if you believe that those things are what make you a woman, then your definition of woman is based on physical and psychological traits, that having a vagina is part of being a woman, and that gender roles are important. This approach runs counter to the ideology that most trans people seem to subscribe to. I also think that this approach is a recipe for failure and frustration, because there are those who will always hold the scientifically accurate definition of woman, and once again, trying to force people to believe otherwise seems authoritarian and egotistical. I also don't really understand trans as a label either. If a person wants to be seen as a woman, then they should call themselves a woman. By calling themselves trans, trans becomes their identity. It makes little sense to me that someone would call themselves trans and yet be upset when others refer to them as trans instead of as a woman. Though, once again, I don't really know what it means to be trans because, according to the new ideology, the concept of both being a man or being a woman is completely ambiguous, so the idea of transitioning from one to the other seems arbitrary. And I think this holds true for the entire concept of gender as an identity in the first place. If gender roles are a social construct, then gender identity fails to describe anything about you. By its own ideology, gender identity is meaningless. I think that gender labels might actually be harmful for self-expression. The more that people try to define these labels, the more they are trapped by them. This is probably why there are so many gender labels, because each person wants a label that perfectly defines what they are as an individual. But looking for a label that describes you as a person will result in frustration. No two people will ever agree on the exact meaning of these labels because they seem to be based on personal emotion instead of objective characteristics. And this isn't about not wanting to call people by a specific pronoun. I really don't care. I'll call you by what you want to be called and I'll do my best to remember it. Well, unless it's something weird like it, because I think that's inherently degrading. It's like Eastern dragons. You wouldn't call one a cocksock, even if he really begged for it, because it's just kind of weird to refer to someone as an object. Anyway, at some point people started saying, I am not defined by my sex, and I agree with that sentiment. What I don't agree with is the mentality that seems to follow, which is, I am defined by my gender. That is not a step forward. It's a lateral step from being defined by one label into being defined by another label. And I don't think that labels should ever define a person. I think that people should be defined by the amalgamation of their actions, for which there is no label other than their own name. Once again, I don't hate trans people, I just really don't get it.